Here.
Dr. Knight? Here. Mrs. Love?
Here.
Mrs. Polakowski?
Here.
Heather Smith?
Here.
Mrs. Tracy Smith?
Here.
Mrs. Williams?
Here.
Mrs. Rhodes?
Here. Do we have any citizens' comments?
Yes, we'll get them on the board.
Okay.
Starting to cool off. Mr. Miswell must have thrown some ice on the compressor.
Hi, may I speak to Amy, please? Thank you. Hi, Amy. Hi. Thank you for Southmoreland. Go ahead with your citizen comment.
Hi, my name is Amy Cavalier. I'm a resident at 163 Hilltop Drive, and I'm the parent of an upcoming first grader and third grader, and I'm also an educational professional. Sorry. I'd like to thank the teachers for their hard work and dedication during the pandemic last spring. Moving forward, I'd like to ask the board to consider a combination of the following plans which have not yet been presented to my knowledge. Using these plans, limit contact, and give a virtual option for families. Plan 1, use the Rossdale facility and the third floor at the high school and hire enough teachers to make class sizes small enough to comply with guidelines. Present a plan to the community outlining the cost. Ask the community if this option existed when they choose it. When families choose higher classes, it is then the option to send their kids to school in brick and mortar 5 days per week. I propose combining Plan 1 with Plan 2. Plan 2, families could choose 100% virtual learning. This option helps Southmoreland to offer something similar to cyber school. If teachers were presented with appropriate professional development and families were to choose this option, funding would then be kept at Southmoreland instead of paying significant money to cyber schools for the cyber option. Lastly, I would offer that if the goal with the reopening plan is to limit the number of contacts, the presented AB plan does just the opposite. When students are not at Southmoreland buildings, we do not know who they are in contact with. Are they at daycare with students in neighboring districts? Are they with grandparents who are most at risk? We can't say. Again, I urge the board to look at using options 1 and 2, opening Rossdale and hiring more teachers, combined with option 2, 100% high quality virtual learning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. First grader and third grader.
Everybody
Are
else?
the microphones on?
I don't think they're wrong.
He said they are. That's that one in front of you.
You hear that?
It is space. Oh, that idea. Hello.
You hear it on the...
Temporarily.
Oh, I hear it.
Okay. That was all, Peggy?
No, I have one more.
Okay.
They're on. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I just don't know if the public can
Here, let me pull it up and see.
use it or not. He said he did.
Everybody
Are
else?
the microphones on?
I don't think they're wrong.
They're on.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Davis. Go ahead with your citizen comment.
Thank you. My name is Erica Davis. I am a resident at 430 Everson Avenue in Scottsdale. I am a parent of an upcoming second grader and fourth grader. And I would just like to urge the board to consider full-time back-to-school brick and mortar for all the students who are willing to do that. Parents can sign a waiver of consent. I understand the social distancing protocols that need to be in place. But as Amy just said, I do agree that there will be, if we go with her option B and do a robust online program as well, then there will be students who choose, or parents who choose to do that as opposed to coming to school full-time, and that may limit our numbers enough that we would be able to follow all the social distancing protocols. And I think it's particularly important for our elementary kids who really need that face time with their teachers, and the options of maybe even, the high school kids or middle school kids doing a hybrid or a full virtual education, so that there is enough space to accommodate all of the elementary students who would be needing the face-to-face with their teachers. I strongly encourage you to consider it's full-time back to school for all of our students, particularly our elementary students. I feel like 5 days with their teacher is best, and I just don't understand how parents, working families, are going to be able to do another option, really, any other option besides going back to school full-time. There's not a child care facility in Scottsdale that would be able to accommodate the kids from our district into a child care program. I work at the YMCA. We actually looked into trying to do that. We are not able to do that. And there is nothing in Scottsdale that would be able to accommodate that. And even if you could find child care, I don't know how these working families, who many of them have been laid off for 3 months, could afford child care year-round now when, that has never been in a budget for them. So particularly our district, I just don't see how people can afford child care on a consistent basis. So I just really strongly urge, at least for our elementary students, to go back full-time, 5 days a week with their teachers, have the parents sign a waiver, and like Amy said, do a online supper school for our district, to provide for everyone who is not comfortable with that, or maybe the high school students, like I said, to make room for in the other buildings for elementary to spread out. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you consider our thoughts, and thank you all, and to all the teachers for all the hard work you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do we have any more?
No.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to superintendent information.
Yes, I'd like to thank Mr. Clara. This week we were able to submit our Title I, Title II grants. We also worked on submitting the CARES application. Today we completed, or not completed, but we worked very diligently on the COVID Safe and Healthy Schools grant. Provided the board some information on some targeted items that we might want to consider. And we still have the Title IV grant. So there, before June 30th, we had 4 major grants that are probably going to put about $1 million into the district's budget. So we've been working very hard in getting those completed. And I just wanted to thank Dan Clara for assisting me in getting those, at least 4 of them, pretty well on the way of being completed. Thank you.
Well done.
Vince, is Dan the only administrator that does grants? You and him, or is there?
He and I.
Okay.
Solicitor information.
It's later in the agenda, but my only report, other than what was discussed in executive session, would be that I accompanied the second appraiser to Rossdale last week. The first appraiser has completed his appraisal and sent it in, and sending this invoice to be paid, so that's why that's in the agenda for his services. And I understand there was some medical issues with the family of the other appraiser, but that's been resolved, and I've emphasized with him that we would like to have that, really need that before our next meeting in July. And he thought that he could accomplish that. That's all I would have for public.
Okay.
Question, where's the appraisal?
I have it, I didn't bring it with me, but I'm going to make that, the intent, I think, would be to make them both public at the same time. And my reason for doing that is so that the one would not be in a position to have influenced the other. But if you disagree with that, you can vote and I'll disclose the number.
Do you really think they tell each other what to do? They undercut each other? Or
No, just being, conservative lawyer.
And like I said, I'm voting on something I've never seen.
I believe we're just voting for the fee.
Yeah, for something I've never seen yet. I mean, you couldn't prove it by me that it actually exists. I mean, I've never seen it.
Any other, is that all you have, David?
That is.
Okay. All right, then, we'll move on to budget discussion.
Can we talk about everything first and do budget last?
What do you mean, talk about everything now?
Just because, everything else that's on the agenda, because it seems like the budget will be the big thing.
To answer that question procedurally, you could make a motion, but it would have to include the budget and the next three resolutions, I think, should be done after you pass the budget. So those four would all have to be moved. So you have the budget, you have the continuing taxes, you have the real estate taxes, and you have the homestead exclusion. I suppose theoretically you could pass the homestead exclusion, but the other three should be done in that order. You do the budget before the taxes.
Well, the budget discussion, it's under item D. Then you go to old business. You have two motions under old business, and then you're back to new business, the budget. So,
I think I took your comment to mean you wanted to put it farther back. Am I misunderstanding?
I just thought if we could get the other things that have nothing to do with that, and then do that at the end, just so that, that's just my suggestion.
Let me get your...
If no one else wants to do that, I'm good with that too.
There are
So you wanna-
items on here that I need to know the budget has.
Well,
Oh, okay.
you mean like, go ahead and move to the old business, do those two, and then do budget discussion, and then go to the new business? Because we have four things there.
Okay, Dr. Sykes doesn't agree with it, we'll just, if no one else wants to do it, just do it as it is, it's not worth an argument.
Well, there's one person who's made a motion or a request, so.
I didn't make a motion.
Okay,
I just
well,
asked if
all
anybody
right,
else
then.
wanted to wait and do it at the end, but I'm good with not. I don't want to waste any more time.
Okay.
All right, we'll go ahead with budget discussion then. Mr. Marnell?
Did I get one?
please take one. There should be plenty.
Thank you.
Extra, thank you.
These are hot. I'm freezing. So. Here, there's extra.
Take one of these, just in case it comes up. David, take one of these and pass them around.
Yeah. Well, it was on there, we just didn't have it in our hand.
Okay, the first handout is a summary of our final budget facing us this evening. At the top of the page is our estimating ending fund balances. Now, I left out the possible surplus that we could end up this school year with. Right now, this estimated ending fund balance is assuming what we had passed for the current year, which was a balanced budget, revenues equal expenditures. But we do have a potential surplus range of $220,000 to possibly $500,000, but we are still processing invoices, and we have, of course, to continue to book accounts payable and other items, but I feel very strong that there will be at least a small surplus of $220,000 to possibly up to $500,000. Now, it would be your choice if you wanted to add that in to these numbers up here. But I caution you, if we do that, that will probably pump that unassigned fund balance over the 8% range. Let's do some quick math there. What is 8% of our expenditure budget? No, Mr. Patonic and I know what will happen if we do that.
You won't be able to raise taxes if
The
it goes
Department of
up?
Education would prohibit us from maybe passing the full amount of our taxes. The 8% would be $2,537,000. So if we minus what we have there on paper, $2,437,839, you know, that gives you a potential at a surplus of nearly $100,000. So if we put in 220 or even up to 500, we would be over that 8%. You would then have to authorize me to take that difference, in other words, keep the unassigned under 8% and move the potential surplus into what's called the assigned fund balance. And of course, then that assignment, that extra fund balance, you have the $207,000 that is in there that Mr. Patonic and I have worked on over the years as a potential for tax appeal refunds. Now, we've made refunds over the years, and that's what we're down to. And I'd like to keep that there because, you know, there are always appeals that could come, and it's nice to have some reserve for that. So it's your, you know, your choice if you want to include the potential surplus in here and put it under assigned fund balance, or leave it out and recognize it when the general fund is officially closed by the auditor and I in October and November.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely.
You had said a few days ago, is that the total, or does that take into account some revenues that didn't come in? Is that minus what revenues might not come in, or is that?
I'm taking into account what I am assuming as revenues that could come in, and the revenues that would come in post July 1st that the auditor and I would count as revenues for the old year. We usually keep that open for 60 days. That would, usually, it's the earned income tax that comes in July that's usually based on collections in May and June. So, again, that's my range, 220 to 500.
What did you end last year?
Last year, we were down in the $200,000 range, if I recall. But that got reflected in this unassigned fund balance, that this is a rolling number. So every year when you close operations, revenues and expenses are closed to your unassigned fund balance, and then your revenues and expenses start off with zero for the new year. Revenues and expenses are temporary accounts.
$30,800,000 2022 revenue include the potential for us to lose that amount that Tasbo said could happen?
Well, that second handout I passed out, as I was thinking today, how this thing has evolved over the last several months. Now, the top page was my pre-first draft, way back on January 9th. I never passed this out to you, the board, and I had a deficit of $463,000. And of course, that was long before we knew that we were going to have these problems that hit us in March, the pandemic. And that startled me, that starting deficit. Now again, I always start off very conservative, so what you saw then, the second page, was that first draft we discussed back on January 15th. So there were some changes that happened between my first draft, what I call pre-first draft, and yours. I increased my assumption on collections in some of the areas. No, I'm sorry, I increased my assumption in some of the revenue categories. I also did a significant amount of cuts in the expenditure budget. What drove me to do that both ways was because I wanted to the greatest extent possible, you know, that fat guy sliding out on a skinny branch, I wanted to hopefully show that there was a potential for a surplus. So as we started out there in the middle of January, we had a potential surplus of $294,000. And I wanted to see that because I knew we were negotiating with these employment groups. And I knew that, you know, there was a sincere desire to possibly have some settlements with these groups going into the new year. The next page, January 23rd, was a progress budget. There was some minor modifications between the two drafts that increased the potential surplus to nearly $335,000. And those came in some further expenditure cuts.
May I interrupt you for 1 second? So between January 9th and January 15th, you made $466,000 worth of cuts?
Probably...
Before you gave this
the
to
cuts
board.
were probably around $467,000, plus the addition of some additional revenues that I recognized.
Okay, that was before we got anything.
Yes.
So the first one...
And you remember there was a lot of discussion on what did you cut, Mr. Marnell?
Yeah, that seems like a lot.
Well, yes, because I remember in the past being chastised for rolling out a first draft budget where I didn't take the initiative to make cuts in the budget. Some of you will recall some of those discussions from the past. And so I took that upon myself to take responsibility to do that. And as I explained back in January, I went through many accounts, account by account, and I looked at, on my screen, I would populate multiple screens, the budget module screen that I was working on, plus past history. You know, the current year-to-date, which was 19-20 back in January, then the 18-19 fiscal year for that account, and 17-18. And I would look at past history, and there were a lot of accounts that continued to roll on that had money budgeted but had never shown an expenditure. So I cut it. There were also accounts that perhaps expended only half of what was being budgeted. So I trimmed them. So I went through all the accounts, and I did that work for you. At least I thought that was my responsibility as board treasurer to do that. So I did it. Now going forward then, there were, of course, the April 23rd progress draft. Now we're into the pandemic. We have school closure, and things are changing. So that potential surplus of $334 is now evaporating. We had a change to recognize in our tuition with the Central Westmoreland CTC, more because going from a budget of 52 students attending to 76 students. So, you know, it's not the CTC's fault that we have an increase in potential tuition expense. It was that more kids this winter wanted to go to the CTC, so we have to pay for that.
So I just have a question. Why did we not know that moving into the year? Because, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're going to VOTEC, now this year obviously might be a little bit different, but if you're going to the VOTEC, you know that prior to the year end. So before a budget would be even adopted, we should have known, somebody should have known, maybe not you, but somebody here in the district should have known how many children were going to VOTEC, because those positions are awarded prior to school being out so that you can plan accordingly for scheduling purposes for that student to be out.
Well, that number of 76 came from the scheduling that took place this winter. The number of 52 what was in the budget that had rolled over from the 19-20 fiscal year. We actually had more students attending this year than what we had budgeted for over a year ago.
Right, that's what I'm questioning, like...
Well, there's nothing we can do about, once a budget is adopted in June, like last June, that the school year starts and more kids are attending, there's nothing we can do about that line item.
So we didn't know what our attendance was going to be at VOTEC until after...
I did not know. No.
But that's what I'm just questioning, like, in my mind, that's a number that should be something we know by the end of the school year. Unless, of course, maybe, I don't know if other schools don't send all of their allotment. Are we able to send more? Does that happen, like...
No.
I mean, I just thought that, like, once you knew that you were going to VOTEC, you were going to VOTEC, and you know that, you know, when you're in 9th grade, if you're going to VOTEC in 10th grade, you know that prior to school being out, like, pretty significantly before, if I remember correctly, but, I mean, maybe something has changed. I just think that we would have known, we should have known prior to a budget how many children we needed to allot for. So I'm not blaming you for that. I'm just saying somewhere there was a break in the chain of communication to you
Well,
of how many kids we should budget
I think to address
for.
that is what we did this winter. Getting those scheduling numbers for the 2021 school year. The potential number of students who wanted to go for this coming school year reflected in this draft budget so that we wouldn't be surprised. Now, we could still be surprised. School could start at some point in August or September, and you may end up with more students going than the 76 we have budgeted. We don't know that. And I understand students will come to school and change their schedules. I know as a kid I did, even in college. You sign up for a class and you drop it and you move to another class.
Hold on, Dan.
Scheduling numbers
I'm sorry.
for the 2021 school year. The potential number of students who wanted to go for this coming school year reflected in this draft budget so that we wouldn't be surprised. Now, we could still be surprised. School could start at some point in August.
Me.
So,
We have,
I just know
we don't know
from...
that. And I understand students will come to school and change their schedules. I know as a kid, I did.
Basis, we would get...
I think you brought up the youth.
Is that a feedback loop?
Program.
Drop it, move to another class.
School would change
Hold on,
50, 60 students on a monthly basis.
Scheduling
I'm not
numbers
sure,
I'm sorry, 2021.
why we did that. There's kids
It's gonna be on a
going,
continual loop now.
changing programs, not being able to get into a program.
Who is our CTC rep this year? Mr. Carson?
Now, we could still be surprised. School could start.
I would like to meet with you and the new business manager and maybe their new director. I'd like to talk about what we did over in the eastern Westmoreland VOTEC years ago. We went from this abrupt change that happens year after year where you might have 50 kids and then you might have 80 kids and then you have that abrupt change in tuition, and that causes all kinds of stir like it does now. We went to a rolling average situation so that these spikes were smoothed out. Now, some people would say, well, that's not fair. Well, as long as the member, now, there was only 3 school districts, so it was very easy to get an okay on that, and I think we have, 10 entities in this VOTEC, so it might be impossible to get 10 to agree, but I always liked that idea where we had a rolling average, so that, you didn't see these spikes in attendance that caused these gyrations, and, oh my God, we have to add potentially $200,000 to our budget. Now, that has gone down since that point because they have changed their budget several times, and so the tuition per student has gone down. But anyway, we were reflecting with these drafts situations that were coming to light. Of course, there were a lot of emails that went out this winter and spring, and not everything that went out and was answered is reflected on these little summaries, but the other one that we talked about
I think
back
Mr. Crosscheck might be on the phone to answer the tech question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't want to keep him if you,
That's okay.
I don't think that speaker's working.
They had a new business manager out there also, that might be a reason why it's...
I mean, I just didn't realize that it was so, like, I guess I thought that, like, once you were going to VOTEC, you were going to VOTEC.
Hello, Mr.
If
Crosscheck.
you dropped out of that, I didn't realize
Yeah.
more
Can you
people
add
could be
some clarity
added.
to the
Like,
question that
that
was
was just
posed?
my confusion.
Hold on.
Well,
Okay.
we had it worked
Mr.
out
Crosscheck's on the line.
back in the early 90s.
You have to yell.
Go ahead, Mr. Crosscheck.
It was linear with Robin there.
There is no steadfast way of knowing that, what your number is simply be a projection for the business. One of the major things is income information, scheduling process, want to change their mind for scheduling, has to, think, try to accommodate production ability, when kids having the ability to go to that. So, to say that, it's 52, and then you go in with 52, and 15, 22 kids decide, I'd like to be in the program, I don't know that I have much, authority to say, you know what, now, we can't allow you into that program.
Vince, we really can't hear him at all.
Yeah, I can't hear it all.
I don't
I don't
know
think
if
the
that
microphone's
speaker over there is
working
working.
Well,
Dan, hold on. Dan, hold on 1 second. Peg's going to call you on her phone and put you by the microphone back there. Okay. If you could hang up.
Sorry.
He's basically saying there's no way for them to know.
Right.
Even
Which is
after
just
school
confusing
starts,
for
they
me.
come
I don't-
and say,
Yeah.
can I be in the program, from what I could hear.
You had no the year before. Mr. Masha, that's okay, honestly. Like, I understand now from what Jason is saying, it's fluid, it changes. I just didn't realize that, oh, I hear speakers now, I can hear myself.
Yeah,
I did not realize that those numbers can change. I thought, like, once you were assigned VOTEC, you were assigned VOTEC. I understand that you could drop back, that maybe our numbers would lessen, but I didn't realize that through the year, those numbers continue to change and continue to add. That was confusing to me, so.
And what the VOTECs do then, all of them, not just ours, but all of them in the state, when their school years, their fiscal years are over and their auditors come in and their auditors close the books, then they do a reconciliation with all the member districts that send students there, and that reconciliation could end up with, like we have seen over the years, refunds coming back, excess tuition that was paid, because your tuition charge is based on a budget, and then of course, as we know, the situation changes during the year, so you might end up paying more because less students attend, or you might not end up paying enough because, less students attend or more students attend. So there's a reconciliation, you either get a refund or, you still owe some money. And again, it all goes for what? The the education of those students that is guaranteed by the school code. But anyway, as we discussed back in April, we knew Mr. Miswall was retiring, so, we calculated his potential payout, which would be the potential that's within their agreements, so much per day for unused sick days and vacation days. And then we started talking about, you see question marks, of adding in the governor's money that he had added for basic ed and special ed. And then, there were some modifications to, decrease in costs for health insurance and dental and vision. And then that brought the potential, those 5 changes brought the potential budget surplus down to nearly $132,000. And then you remember there was discussion, well, what would it look like without an Act 1 tax increase? So that made a deficit then of nearly $211,000. And you remember, I was asked, what about a half a tax increase? So, again, that's the fluidity of this situation as we continued moving through the budget development process. Then we get to May. In May, you see that there's now reflected, because of changes, now a deficit of $136,000. And of course, there was the change was reflected for the estimate for students going to the CTC, the retirement payout for Mr. Miswall, net changes in salaries and benefit accounts. You added salary for Mr. Novikov. We had some minor changes in our billings for the next year in our exterminator fees. I added in that estimated cost, remember, for the contracting for a sewage treatment plant operation company. I added in the estimate for the high school elevator project, and of course we added in estimates for the various paving projects, the recoating at the SPC roof. Now, whether some or all those things get done this summer or not, the money's in there. And then I added in the governor's money. So all those expenditure changes and that minor addition of the governor's money, now we're down to a deficit of $136,000. And then, of course, at the bottom of the page are those conditions. What if we pull out the governor's money? What if we pull out the tax increase? And you can see how the deficit changes. Without an Act 1 tax increase and pull out the governor's money, your deficit is down to $546,000. So again, it's very fluid. It's changing. We're in the pandemic situation. It's a mess. I can't speak for Mr. Patonic or Mr. Mash or any of you, but I can tell you what, it was just, that 13-week period was just crazy, and it still is. What's this, week 14 now of this situation? Or week 15, I'm kind of losing track. But anyway, then we get to May 12th, our discussions on May 12th, and I make notes on the page for you as we were discussing that night. There were still decisions for final budget or proposed budget. Leave in an Act 1 increase or take it out. Leave in governor's money or take it out. Leave in or take out added expenditures. Reflect one of the local revenue impact assumptions. Remember the PASBO and PASA and PSB, they got together and there was that study done, and we ended up reflecting the worst case PASBO assumption, which you see down there in the center of the page. If we pulled out the governor's money, which ended up being the right thing to do because we're not getting it, basically we're getting hold harmless, getting next year what we're getting this year, and then we went with the worst case revenue assumption, which brought our potential deficit to $906,821. Then again, in the bottom section there were, again, I brought up those items that were there, that are in the expenditure budget, the sewage treatment plant operating company, the elevator project, which we're doing, of course, the paving projects, the recoating, and then, of course, the scenarios at the bottom, without the governor's money, without the Act 1 increase. And then at the bottom, you have the calculation of the potential revenue losses. Remember, Assumption 1, worst case, Assumption 2, a little better case. And as a group, that night, we agreed the most prudent thing to do would be to go with the worst case scenario, because we don't know. So then, we get to the next page, May 21st. And that's the night we adopted the proposed final budget. And that's where we were, May 21st. The local revenues were adjusted. I took out the worst case local revenue assumption, taking out nearly $815,000 as a potential loss in local revenues next year. Pulled out the governor's money of $67,587. So that adjusted the total revenue structure to $30,380,327. And of course, there were various items reflected in the expenditure budget. So the budget ended up expenditures of $30,960,000, producing a deficit on May 21st of $580,423. So we jumped from May to tonight, to June. And of course, the deficit jumps to $827,000. Well, why is that? Well, there were two major additions to the expenditures that we discussed. You remember, there's the MOUs with our employee groups to pay their health insurance increase. So they would continue to pay their current payroll deduction that's in place this year. The increase that they normally would see in their payroll deduction, we're going to pay that difference. And for all the groups, it amounts to roughly $112,000 for the whole year. Then we added, as a cautionary item, an additional $100,000 as potential increase in charter school tuition. So those two items are $212,000. The CARES Act funding and the recent COVID-19, aka coronavirus relief funding, are both added into the revenue side, and they're both added into the expenditure side. Now, the COVID-19 monies right now, I have an asterisk in my notes. Right now, they're included in that line 15. It's called budgetary reserve. The $193,351, when I did this a couple days ago, we did not have a detail yet on how we were going to expend those monies. We have that tonight, that plan. So, but I needed to account for that money within the total expenditures. So that is in there with the normal $50,000 budgetary reserve. So know that it's in there. It just needs to be, after tonight, I will reallocate it and set up the special line item budgetary accounts to expend those monies in the new fiscal year. And there were some other modifications that happened. And I brought all my notes with me in case there are detailed questions. All the little nicky-nack kind of changes that got reflected, that got me and got us to this point tonight. And on the second page of the main handout tonight, just some factoids. Right now the change in budgetary expenditures, driven by the new federal monies, of course, the expenditure budget is up $881,000 over last year. But again, as Mr. Masha reflected, that's reflects the CARES money and the COVID money. So you're talking, $500,000 and nearly $600,000 there, maybe more. Changes in the very object accounts, and then of course, the average assessed value for homesteads and farmsteads that are in the two counties, the total number of homesteads and farmsteads. And these are the kind of statistics that then reflected then in that homestead-farmstead resolution. These kinds of counts and numbers were important in calculating the reduction that folks would see on their property tax bill. And then, of course, the estimated property tax rates, millage rates for next year. Now, I have to take all this information that's in our system and complete then what's known as the PDE 2028. I've started the draft here. All that then I have to amend where I'm at. That will then get submitted to the state. So anyway,
Mr. Marnell,
Yes, sir.
that, increase for the cyber charter school, that
Yes, sir.
$100,000 increase, what is that total in the budget for this upcoming year?
You know what, I could run that sort separately and give you that. I don't think I have that kind of revenue sort with me here. No, I have very summarized sorts.
That's up over $1 million.
Well, yes.
Close to it.
And I could easily get that answer by hopping down the hallway, but know that, right now,
I have it. If you want, I have that email you sent us.
Thank you.
It said, we budgeted for the 1920 year, $860,000.
Well, you know what,
It says, so if the projection holds up, we will have a shortfall in this line item of $195,000. You originally budgeted $971,000, which made us less than, for next year, what we would have been. And what we would have spent this year looks like it would be $1.05 million.
Please, I apologize.
If you're-
And I know that's all in these notes here, but you got that note, so that's good, thank you.
That's what that 100,000 added to it, Chris.
So he had projected $971,000 for next year, and then he added $100,000, so I guess it's 1.07. And this year, we spent 1.05.
We're way off. But we need to have more. Forecast more for that.
Jim, I know I asked you this a little bit ago, but what is the average cost per regular student in cyber charter school?
If anybody wants the actual detail line item pages, I've run it and I can make copies. I have a master copy here, but yes, roughly, little under $12,000 per student for non-special ed, a little over $22,000 for a special needs student. And for them, a special needs student is learning support students. Again, I have the exact figure down in my office, and I apologize that I don't have it with me,
I'm fine
but
with that. I just want the public to know what it costs.
I'm sorry, say,
It's cheaper than them coming to school here. So our cost is $16,000 per student.
I don't know that.
Oh, yeah.
We have like 65 kids in cyber school.
Yeah. So it
So-
costs less for a kid to go to cyber school than it does for them.
Well, is
It's the other way around.
is this cyber school SOLA?
We've always been
Well,
told the opposite.
They're going to.
Right.
Yeah.
We would
For
need to
12.
check that
Well,
out.
I
Well, let's see,
always
back,
thought they got the
this
same
past
amount.
winter,
No, they don't.
this past winter, we had, as I was tracking this, and this goes back away in January, we had 76 students in charter schools. I don't know what
Well, I think my concern with this is we're only budgeting $16,000 more for next year, which, if
Oh,
you're right, that's only one, we only think one more child is gonna go to cyber school
I
next
understand
year.
what you're saying, yes, I agree.
And I don't
and-
think that's the case.
And I have to tell you something, from experience, that's a line item that we've never hit. Because you never know until after the school year gets rolling. And those are monthly billing statements, and you'll see students get picked up by them, you'll see students drop off by them. And then they do a final reconciliation that happens in July or August, where they do their final, ADM counts, and then there's a reconciliation whether we owe a little bit more or they owe us a refund. So it's another moving target. There's no fixed amount of kids that start the year off and that's what you're gonna end the year with. You don't know.
Is there a lot that graduated this year? We have that?
I don't know that.
2, I think Peggy told us.
2.
I'm just concerned if we're only budgeting for one more next year than we have right now.
So basically, we budgeted for 76 students last year, is that what we're saying? And we're projecting possibly 125 students moving to cyber school next year. So is that 125 additional students? Is that 125 total students? And if we increase that by 50 students and made it that we would be 126 students, that'd be an additional $600,000 to the budget.
Mr. Masha, do you have an answer for what Dr. Fike said about how much it costs to educate a child?
You just take our budget and divide by the number of students. It's a big picture. pay for everything, not just the
Well, you remember when you do broad math like that, there are things that cyber charter schools do not have as an expenditure. They don't have, $1.5 million or whatever I could look up the number, our transportation budgets. So
Right.
they do not have that cost. They also do not have, built into that transportation budget, the cost of transporting kids to non-public schools. They don't have built into their budget a cyber charter school tuition like we do. We're paying their tuition rate, and that's part of our total expenditure cost.
Right.
They're not paying for brick and mortar institutions. Now, we know they have headquarters buildings somewhere, and they may have a few brick and mortar. I really know very little about their actual setup. So, yeah, there's big differences between a brick and mortar public school and an online cyber school.
Well, I'm not questioning that, it's just that we pay what we pay.
Well, that's correct.
They don't have a football team, and we know that, okay?
Right. They don't have athletics.
But if you divide the number of students into
Yes.
our budget, it comes out to 16,000.
That goes a lot into why, we've always thought on our side of the table, why the calculation form that the state designed back in '97 was so unfair to us. How the tuition rate gets calculated. And that's something that PSBA, PASBO, PASA, and groups have been fighting for over 20 years to get that funding for them changed to be more reflective of running a cyber school as opposed to a brick and mortar school.
Okay, our budget is 31,717,948, and you would divide that by 1,800.
Hey, these are all good questions. Send me an email, and I'll get those factoids to you, absolutely. And a lot of it is buried in my notes here. These are all my individual folders that go into building a budget plus my 3-ring binder.
I was looking at more students, I think, because that changes all the time. It is at least 16.
I can't argue against that, of course.
I subtract, Dr. Fike, I subtracted off the CARES money, because really that's not like money that we normally expend. But if I did that and then divided it out by 1,900 students, that was $16,408.
Let me appraise
and I'm
you
not-
of an ongoing item
Easy.
across the state with business managers, and I'm sure superintendents and others, is the fact that those cyber charter schools are going to be fighting for some share of those monies in that calculation form, in the new tuition rate for next year. Because the form, it's PD 363, business managers have to complete that, and superintendents sign it, and we have to submit it by the end of August. And it's based on a number of assumptions. We have to put in our estimated ending ADMs for the current year. We have to put in our ending budget. But they're going to be fighting for some share of that money in that new, I know they're talking about that calculation form, so, and that may drive up that tuition
I
payment.
mean, I'd be surprised if it's more than that per child. I think we have to...
CARES and COVID?
I think we have to say, our expenses are the same no matter how many kids are going to our school, though, correct?
Pretty much so.
So if 100 leave, we still have the same expenses. So it's not necessarily
Here.
that it's, we still have the same expenses here. It's not necessarily cheaper for us to pay for a kid to go to cyber school. That's not what we're putting out there.
We don't get that ADM.
Right,
We don't have to pay, we don't get the income either.
right. So,
You get right back to your word, it's a wash. It's right.
right, but I think what was said at the beginning was it was cheaper for us to send a child to cyber
It's just a
school than it
question
was.
that I had. That surprised me, because I thought we paid more for cyber school than that. I thought it was
I would like to
17 or
validate
18,000.
that
Well, it's $1
value.
million, I think
Yeah.
that's enough. I mean,
Yeah,
where
right.
do you want to
Well,
pay it,
yeah.
but you don't think that's enough money?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think they should even get that amount of money. I think 6,000 or 7,000 for a student should be plenty. That was part of the, bill back, probably last year around this time, that, there were several bills going around. I don't think they went anywhere. I don't know how far they got out of committee or anything, but that was one of the things that they wanted to reduce the amount that was being paid to the cyber schools. And there was also talk about if a child wanted to go to cyber school and the home district had cyber school, here we have it for high school, but we don't have it for the other grades. But there was talk that if we had something then, and they decided to go to a different cyber school, then, you know, they were talking about having the parents pay tuition.
Right.
I don't think that went anywhere either, but these
I
are
don't
all
think it
things
will
that
this year.
at some point, you know, well, yeah, at some point, I think we need to, you know, get together with other districts, maybe, you know.
I just want to reemphasize that it's not cheaper for the school district for kids to go to cyber school.
Yeah, we still paying a
Right.
big price.
Just-
No, that's right.
Just so
Yeah.
we're clear.
That's correct.
It's still, it's not good.
You know, you have, you know, you could calculate a fixed cost per classroom. You have a teacher there, right? And all that goes into that classroom, the cost of the structure, the utilities, and whether that you know, that teacher could be a $75,000, you know, step 15, or it could be a $50,000 step whatever, plus their benefits. And if they're teaching 20 kids, or if they're teaching 18 kids, or they're teaching 23 kids, that cost for that room is still the same. And if you lose a child, so you still have that cost per room, plus then you've got the added cost for the cyber charter school tuition.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that student loss then is each ADM counts. Each student is an average daily membership, and then that nicks that's a nick on your basic ed subsidy, because ADMs are part of that. It nicks your special education subsidy because your ADMs are part of that. And of course, if that student's not riding a school bus, then you know, you're paying for that school bus, and you have one less kid you're riding, so that's one less rider that is included in that transportation formula, because it's called utilized passenger capacity miles, and that's one of the factors that goes into that. So you've got a fixed cost for, you know, I always thought of a school bus as a rolling classroom. You could have, you know, X number of kids, just like a fixed classroom does, but, you know, that's a fixed cost there, but you lose a kid, it costs you in subsidy as well as costs you in expenditures.
We have any more questions for Mr. Marnell?
So, do we think we should put more money in the budget for this?
As a line item, would you feel more comfortable with that line item being increased?
Right now, you increased it for 12 more kids. It's 12,000, or
No,
sorry, it's
one,
eight.
one more kid.
Well, they added 100,000.
Now, I understand your fear.
It's 12,000 kids.
I understand what you're thinking, because what will happen
This year,
with our potential opening, and will more parents pull their students out for these cyber charter schools? I understand that fear. And it's hard to, how do you budget for that fear? How do you calculate the potential additional students that may go? It may not happen, because we're live, right? And we want to sell our school. We don't want to lose our kids to cyber charter schools. They get a much better education here than sitting at home. I'm not putting down homeschooling, but there's a difference between the true homeschool family and a cyber family. At
We
least-
could just do a budgetary transfer,
Yeah.
right, Jim?
Yeah, that's what I was
I mean,
gonna ask.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't want to add
Yes.
to this deficit, and that's what we're going to do. Either way, if we do it tonight, or you got to make a budgetary transfer, we're paying.
That's true.
Well, it's at the time that the students enroll, correct?
It's up to everybody how they feel about it, but I'd rather keep it the same.
I agree.
I know it's, I don't know if it's going to be enough.
Can I say something on this subject real quick? I found out today, and this has been verified several times, New Ken, Arnold laid off 29 teachers today because they said the kids are not going to come back. They officially laid off 29 teachers today, based on the fact they were going to have so much cyber school requests that they will not get 29 teachers. Now, we're not New Ken Arnold, I understand that, but we often talk about what's happening in other schools. And that happened today. It's Johnson.
I don't know the makeup of our students that go to the cyber charter schools. I mean, the principals and the secretaries know the kids. I don't. So somebody could look at that list of kids and say, well, I know why Jimmy Marnell's going because of whatever. But again, it could be situational for the family. It could be, problems at school, that they just couldn't function with other kids, and that's why they would go to cyber charter school. I don't know.
There are a number of reasons why families put their children into cyber charter. It's difficult to nail down to one because there are varying situations, circumstances happening within the family.
Absolutely.
Could be for health reasons.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, that's very, very true. So, I don't know.
I have one more question. The $112,000 added expenditures for the increase in healthcare for the employees. It says for an MOU, but I only remember us approving one MOU for that. That was for the cafeteria and how does that work with the other bargaining units?
Do you have one with the Education Association, one with the SEIU, and one with the Act 93? Have they been finalized officially? I mean, I reflected the potential cost in there. So maybe my description of, for MOUs, maybe that's not accurate. Potential MOUs or
There's like a potential,
outstanding
One.
MOUs or
yeah,
MOUs.
probably,
One, that was for the custodial and maintenance
right.
and food service personnel.
And I actually don't think the other ones will be called an MOU.
Okay.
I think it'll only be the one MOU, and then possibly an extension of the Act 93 contract, or just a one-year contract. There won't be an MOU, and I think ultimately that other money is there, correct?
I apologize if my terminology
but I just
isn't
don't
exactly
have the other
correct.
MOUs, that's why I asked that. I know we gotta pay it.
Yeah, that's what that's for.
Okay.
So the question you asked at the beginning was what to do with the potential surplus? Mr. Marnell?
We talked about.
You mean the forecast?
Do we reflect it in the top section under assigned fund balances?
So I guess my question,
And I can do that with the auditor then, as we close the books and we know what the true situation is when we close our revenues and expenses, and I could say it's the desire of the school board that we reflect that actual surplus in our assigned fund balance rather than to unassigned fund balance. And then it would be there for you to redirect for eventualities. Maybe there is an increase in cyber tuition costs, or maybe there's some other need that comes up that's we can't forecast today. Just like you couldn't forecast an elevator breaking down, but it happens.
Now, that surplus can have an effect on other things, you know that.
I'm sorry?
That surplus can have an effect on contract negotiations.
Well,
Yes, it could.
I'm confused because we're still $827,000 in the red. So if we approve this resolution as it's written tonight, that money is all coming from the unassigned fund balance. So why wouldn't it just go back to the unassigned fund balance, which would, I mean, I don't know, am I not understanding something?
I don't think we
correct?
can put it there. If we do, then legally we can't raise taxes.
You exceed.
Well, we're not going to exceed if we're taking $827,000 out of there, so
I guess it
maybe
depends
I
on
just
when
don't
they look at
understand.
it. At what day of the month do they look at it? I don't know. Mr. Peconic, do you have an answer for that? Because I'm not sure the ethical or legal answer to that.
I think that was a concern before. I think that was a question of mine in the past. I wanted to ask a question myself. May I? I mean, is it a good thing or a bad thing well, I'm gonna back up.
Can you
I
move the
think that
speaker
school
closer to
board
him?
has to agree with the designation of what the assigned fund balance is for. So that's kind of a problem to deal with that. Now, one thing that crossed my mind, and again, I don't know if this is an advantage or not, maybe it could be an advantage one way and disadvantage another. In the past, there have been occasions in which monies had put aside in the assigned fund balance for the already existing Arabs. And then we sort of gravitated away from that, or the school board did. Do you have, guidance for the board as to whether that's helpful or not helpful?
Well, I believe that, unlike the way the current accounting regulations that are reflected in governmental procedures, it says that the finance officer, the business manager, the administrator has the authority to move money from unassigned to assigned. It has the governmental body has the authority to move monies to committed.
Okay.
To committed category. Now, that said, I would rather have the governmental body make the decision of putting that money into assigned and or committed as their choice, and how to potentially spend those monies. I can do it, because I have the statutory authority to do that. It's written in the procedures, but I'd much rather have the blessing of the board discussing it and then doing it. There was an allegation a couple years ago about that I played, what was that term? The shell game? You remember that? Well, really, you're not playing a shell game. You're using your ability to say, okay, I'm going to take unassigned fund balance because it could be over 8%, and that could hinder us in a potential tax increase, and then I will move it to assigned and then leave it there for our needs. So now I would rather avoid that kind of discussion and say, you know what, we have a potential there. My recommendation is leave the numbers where they are. When we close the books this fall, and we know the true number, then we will tell you, here's our final 19 school year 2019-2020 fiscal roundup. Here's what the budgetary surplus turned out being, and give you the decision to either leave it in unassigned fund balance or leave the unassigned fund balance drop down to, for example, if you take the 1.8 million on the front of the page, line 17, and if you subtract out that $207,000 for the assigned for tax appeals, your potential ending unassigned fund balance a year from now would be $1.6 million. So after the year is over, in the fall, we'll find out what the true surplus is, 220, 500, whatever that number turns out to be when it's all said and done. And then you can make the decision. Just let it fall down to unassigned fund balance because, we have a potential deficit for this year, or you want to set some of that aside and put it in an assigned category. You might want to make up little categories, like leave the 207 in there for potential tax refunds, put X dollars away for whatever. There was talk several years ago about me putting money aside for future band uniforms. Remember, we did a bid several years ago for band uniforms. It was over $50,000, and I remember, I think it was Mr. Close saying, well, Mr. Marnell, can you set a little bit aside every year so that we're not faced with a $50,000 bill for band uniforms? Well, that would be nice if we were constantly generating a budget surplus year in and year out, but we have not been in that cycle. We're trying to get back to that, and we've been then hit with this situation this year that is hitting all schools, both techs and IUs.
Are we trying to have a surplus every year? Because I think last year you said it was $300,000. I guess here's the point of me saying that.
No, we
We're
don't.
not a for-profit business.
Right.
We're a school district. We're lacking curriculum, we're lacking technology, we're lacking all these things. So for 2 years in a row, to have $300,000 left over, that's our English curriculum, that's our technology, I don't think I understand why we would want to have a surplus when we're lacking in so many areas.
I understand that. Yes, I can't disagree with that at all.
Mr. Cornell, according to what I can figure out, we owe $1,186,000 in early retirement payments. $1,186,000. Years ago, when they first started, I suggested that money be put away in the assigned fund balance because it's a bill we have to pay no matter what. Well, I was called everything but a woman on that one. Now, you can't put $1,186,000 in that fund, but we do owe it. Whether you call it or not, it's assigned money. We owe it. It's a bill we're going to pay from now until 2024. It would seem to me that it would be wise to put some money away for these bills and not have it available to be spent on anything else. I really think we owe the money. We owe the money. I think we should protect it, or some of it. That's what I would do with it in the assigned fund.
There's a lot of things we talked about putting in there, Dr. Fike. I don't know if I agree with that, but we talked about putting money in there for paving every year, for Chromebooks. I think that was talked, years ago, and it's an idea that we should do it again, because that we're gonna have that reoccurring payment, like Dr. Fike said. But when it comes to budget time, we try to strip everything down.
Let me tell you, the very first line item in our detailed budget is for our termination payouts for our teachers. It's the very first line item. We have, in July, we were going to be paying out $294,000 in past ERIPs. That's for the 15 ERIP program, 2018, and last year's 2019. Now, thing to know is the payment for the 15 program, this is the last payment that's happening in July, $156,000. So that $156,000 is right now in this line item. So next year, when we roll out the 21-22 draft budget, you'll have that money in there then to take out of that line item and either take that as a budgetary cut or reflect that somewhere else. You can move it to a category for curriculum or infrastructure or whatever.
That's not happening.
I'm sorry?
It's not happening.
Well, let's make it happen.
You can make it happen.
Let's make it happen.
And that's what I'm trying to get at. Let's make this happen. If you tell me I can spend $10, I'll spend 10. I won't spend 100.
I know my boys would.
Give them 10, they'll spend 100.
Grandma gives them a $10 bill, they'll go out and spend it, rather than save it.
Jim, this excess money, could that money be spent on salaries?
Well, of course, leftover fund balance money can be used for anything.
Okay.
In fact, that's what's happening with this deficit. Let's say this deficit actually happens.